there! This is my final video assignment for Intro to Music Education. What chapter sticks with you? So I believe the chapter that sticks with me the most is the final chapter that we read for this class, and it's about effecting change. I think an important reason that so many of us go into education is that we have a dream, we have a vision, and we have passion, and we have a hope to pass on those things to the next generation. And passing on those things in the next generation is effecting a change in the next generation and affecting change in our children to care about the things that we care about. And I think that's so valuable and so important in music education, and I think it's really important and necessary to understand how we affect that change within our students. Chapter starts off with the purpose of teaching. The purpose of teaching is to change students. Very straightforward, very simple, but very realistic and very poignant as to why myself and so many of my classmates are pursuing this path, and why we're choosing to go into education, and why we're choosing to spend so many years of our life going into a field that is often overlooked and underappreciated. And I think it's really necessary to be the central dogma as to why, at least myself, I'm going into this field. And that's because I truly want to change my students, that I want to leave lasting impacts, that I make sure that whoever comes into my classroom leaves my classroom a changed person. Maybe it doesn't have to be about music. Maybe it's about just caring about humanity more, having a deeper appreciation for the arts, having a deeper appreciation for the process of creating. Those are all different things that I want to affect change in within my students. Positive change in the student's performance doesn't come about only because of what the teacher tells the student, but because of what the teacher has the student do. I think this is so important because I feel like a lot of us get caught up in like, maybe I'm teaching it wrong, maybe I'm explaining it the wrong way, maybe I need to find a different approach. But oftenly it just comes down with not about what the teacher ourselves are doing, but it's what we have our students do. And throughout my entire life of being a student, I know that whenever the teachers that left the most important impacts on myself were the ones who were able to have me do the things that I needed to do in that moment, that led me to the next step, that took me to the next obstacle where I had to go, that made me overcome one challenge and leveled me up to the next challenge so I can keep achieving a higher and higher acuity of what I was trying to go after. Whether it be science, whether it be math, whether it be music, it's all about what we do. And I think that is so important because we need to know what to have our students do, and we need to know exactly and the methods that we apply that they are going to bring about the goals that we intend to bring about. And the chapter goes on to talk about expectations. And I think that's even more important because we can be the most we can have all the answers in the world, but students are not robots, and they're not, little, students are not just equations that we can plug in the correct numbers and hope for the best result. They're human beings, just like you and me. Students are imperfect, and they're not going to all function the same, and they're all unique in their own way. And I think that's so important that Duke talks about, that so much of the challenge of teaching is adapting to the uniqueness. It's that we're not teaching models and we're not teaching subjects anymore. We're teaching real human beings that some of them aren't there to learn in the first place. Some of them are just there because they need a meal. Some of them are just there because their parents are forcing them to be there. Some of them are there because they need to be away from their parents. And there's so many different factors that we will never fully expect as these students come into our classrooms, but we have to be ready for them. The answer, briefly, is this. The reality of our experience does not match our expectations and about the experience, and we are unable or unwilling to adjust to the reality of our circumstances. I think it's so crucial that Duke talks about the reality of being a teacher, is that when I, even myself, when I dream of being a teacher, I imagine a classroom of enthusiastic students with their violins, violas, and cellos all ready to play music, and they want to compete and they want to go to state and all these different things. But I have to be realistic with myself that yes, I might have one or two students exactly like the way I imagine, but then there's the 80% of the other students that are just there to have a good time, or some of them are there because their friends are there. Like I said, there's so many different things that brings a student into our classroom that we will never fully understand the scope of. So I think it's really striking with me that Duke keeps it real, and he makes sure that this is not a walk in the park that we're about to take, but it's a challenge that I'm willing to take, and I'm hoping that I can be the best possible version of myself to help affect change in as many people as I can. And it doesn't have to be the change that I expect. As long as it's a positive change in the right direction, I know I'm doing the right thing. Our next question is what do you recognize that effective teachers do, and how do we see those changes in that progression within ourselves regarding teach versus tell? So just from the comparison from my first lesson to my last lesson, that I did with Parker, I myself felt a lot more comfortable and more organic in the second lesson, and I felt that I was able to communicate in a more effective way that got people to have the learning that I envisioned within my head. It definitely went way more to plan, and that's due to just me having more understanding of the pedagogical aspects of teaching, but also to me being more comfortable with my peers in that classroom, and lastly, me having a more clear and focused plan as to what I wanted to get my students to do that day. So I think like the specifics in which I saw my teaching grow and I was doing more of the teaching versus the telling was that I was able to use less instruction to get the same feedback from students. So for example, in my first vibrato lesson, I was just like, this is how you move your hand. This is what you're gonna do. This is how you're gonna make the sound. Vibrato is this. Vibrato is A, B, and C, and we apply B, C, and D to get A, B, and C. It was very technical, very technocratic, very explanatory, rather than more of a hands-on technique. Meanwhile, in the second lesson, I broke it down easier, and I used more questions, and I used more examples, and I showed examples with Parker, and I asked Parker, I'm like, what were you looking for in me that helped you come in with me better? And we asked each other, and it was much more involving, and it got students to engage their minds more effectively rather than hoping that they just reciprocate what you give them. They were a part of the creation process. And I think that's what really makes teaching magical, is that when we can make our students feel like they did something for themselves, that is what makes really strong, effective teaching. Other ways in where I've seen growth myself is that through my personal teaching, I have been able to apply a lot of the sequencing instruction, a lot of the different methods that Duke talks about in his book to help my student and help myself teach my student better. So with my viola student, prior to taking this class, I would kind of just explain to her, well, this is how I practice, this is what I do, and these are all the different tools you can use. And I would constantly be just throwing new tools at her all the time, not really taking account like which tools are working, not taking account for what tools were you know, creating the certain effects that I wanted to see out of her. It was just more like me telling her all these different ways that she could possibly practice her viola. But now I've changed that. I've started to reckon it, and I'm not perfect yet. It will be a while till I get perfect, or before I get proficient. But now I see myself analyzing, like, okay, thinking in my head, where is she at right now? And what's going to be the best thing that I can have her do in this moment, going to take her to where I need her to go. And sometimes I think about the sequencing and I go back to, okay, leap backwards an inch forward. When Duke was explaining this, there's so many times where I realize, oh, I'm doing the exact of the bad example. I'm just inching backwards tiny bit by tiny bit. Like, it was really funny reading through that chapter where he was talking about so many teachers will just take one layer off and take another layer off and hope that we'll get to where we need to go, and then we use the magical words one more time. Which is so funny because I use that word with my student all the time, like, let's do this just one more time, and it's never just one more time. It ends up being like 5-10 more times. So I think having that pedagogical knowledge about sequencing really helps with the way that I teach, and I find myself doing more exploring, not perfecting how I teach, but exploring different ways in which I can teach rather than tell my students. Lastly, what do you understand teachers do that you recognize in a pedagogical understanding? So this is a really cool one, because it's like when you learn any subject in school that relates to, you know, the world, you start to notice the technical terms behind them. And teaching was not something that I never knew the technical terms behind of at all. I knew what was a good teacher and what was a bad, ineffective teacher, and I knew what was the way in which, you know, I was being changed in a positive way rather than a unhelpful way. But I never knew like the terms behind them. I never knew, oh, this teacher is applying this form of rehearsal form number 1, where they're doing an in-context performance. Or this is now form 2, where multiple directives and multiple repetitions in the context. Like, these are things that I never understood inside of observing teaching. I was just like, okay, we're gonna play this part. Oh, we're gonna take away this one adjustment to this. We're going to take away the bowings. We're going to take away the pitches. Now we're just going to play the rhythm. I never understood that there were, you know, words behind these practice techniques. And it's crazy to see how many teachers all use the same thing. In my private lessons, my teacher uses different form. You know, she'll use form 3 all the time, multiple directives, decontextualization. She's always talking about, you know, let's break Bach apart. Let's chunk it up. Let's practice the outline. And these very much are just different pedagogical teaching methods. And with the sequencing, for example, inching forwards and leaping backwards, that's something that's used all the time. The chamber coaches will be like, okay, let's do this entire section, but in pizzicato for now, and really just listen to each other. That is something that, you know, I've always been like, oh, that's a cool technique, but I've never understood that that's a pedagogical tool of teaching. And that so many of these different things throughout my educational experience, they all come from a toolbox. They're just really hidden. They're not hidden, but like they're presented to us in an organic way that we feel like we're not being issued a, you know, a brochure on how to. We're just being told what to do that has us get to where we need to be. So I feel like those things combined really makes what good, effective teachers are. And it's so cool just to learn about all these different ways in which teachers teach. I'm so excited to keep learning more. I'm so excited to understand more about music itself, to understand more about education, understand the pedagogy behind all the different instruments. And, you know, the more that I know, the more that I start to realize that it's kind of all the same. that it's all just about teachers being the teachers teaching rather than telling, and teachers having us do what we need to do in the moment and being able to assess for what we need to do. So I think all that on top of each other. Let me see if I'm missing anything. I don't think I am. I think all that together really sums it up, and I really thank you, Dr. Bourne, for such an amazing, fun, and invigorating and captivating course throughout this quarter. I couldn't have asked for a better introduction into the world of music education. I'm just so beyond excited to continue this journey and continue this path. Make you and so many others around me proud. So thank you.